What do the most luxurious mansions of a bygone era hide behind their magnificent facades? Behind the gilded interiors and sparkling chandeliers lies a grim truth about women who sacrifice their youth for the comfort of others. The lives of the servants seemed stable only until the years inexorably took away the last remnants of their physical strength. Huge, respectable houses ruthlessly got rid of those workers who could no longer perform their daily duties. By watching this video to the end, viewers will learn the true and bitter fate of women who lost their health in hard service. The hidden truth that society has diligently kept silent for decades lies in a profound psychological trap for aging domestic workers. For many years, these selfless women created impeccable comfort in luxurious living rooms and polished silverware to a dazzling shine. When in a good mood, the employers often referred to them as an important part of their large, close-knit family. This created a false sense of complete security and confidence in a stable future for these lonely workers. But the harsh reality turned out to be quite different as soon as their physical stamina began to inevitably wane. At the center of this historical drama is a typical grandmother who devoted more than 40 years of her life to a single respectable household. She knew every dark corner of the enormous mansion by heart and was familiar with every minute habit of her demanding employers. Her irretrievably lost youth had passed amid heavy velvet curtains, cold drafts, and endless steep flights of stairs. She sincerely believed that absolute devotion would guarantee her a peaceful and comfortable old age under the roof of this house. Time imperceptibly sapped her vitality, leaving only a nagging weariness in her hands, worn out over decades of labor. The luxurious stone walls of the spacious mansions became an invisible cage for those who had devoted their entire lives to them. Every morning, Grandma rose long before dawn to light the fireplaces and prepare fresh, fluffy towels. Her hurried footsteps along the long corridors were completely silent, and her constant presence was almost imperceptible to the important guests. Years of impeccable and quiet work seemed to her the most reliable foundation for a prosperous and carefree future. However, in the cold world of high society, only flawless physical efficiency and attractive youth were truly valued. The tragedy of these deceived women lay in their boundless, naive faith in the sincere gratitude of others. They gave away the most precious thing they had without reserve, receiving absolutely no guarantees of safety in return. Their forgotten stories remain a quiet but stern warning about the incredibly high price of blind and unrequited devotion. Viewers are invited to share their detailed opinions in the comments about such unfair treatment of ordinary people. Anyone interested in history should also be sure to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring these hidden pages of the past. A secret carefully passed down from generation to generation by historians hides the true hardship of daily labor in the mansions. The servants' strict daily schedule was planned down to the minute and demanded tremendous physical endurance from the women. The early rise always took place long before dawn, in incredibly cold and damp attics under the very roof. The workers tirelessly carried heavy buckets of coal and endless jugs of hot water for washing. This cruel and exhausting routine slowly but surely wore down even the strongest and most resilient bodies. With each passing year, my grandmother felt the effects of this endless physical strain more acutely and painfully. It became unbearably difficult for her to climb the endless steep steps of the narrow, dark service stairwells. The heavy buckets filled with water seemed heavier and harder to lift with each passing day, and proper rest was an unaffordable luxury. The cold winter drafts in the vast, empty halls pierced her to the bone, stealing the last vestiges of precious warmth. But she stubbornly continued to carry out her many duties, gritting her teeth and carefully hiding her growing weakness. The servants' daily meals stood in stark contrast to the exquisite and expensive dishes generously served at the master's table. More often than not, they were modest and cold leftovers, lacking any variety or nutritional value. The chronic lack of proper food rapidly accelerated the aging process and deprived the women of vital energy. They inexorably withered away much faster than their peers from the more affluent and independent strata of urban society. Their feminine beauty and natural energy were sacrificed daily for the smooth running of someone else's vast household. The bedrooms for the numerous staff were always located in the most uncomfortable and dark parts of the vast residences. These were tiny, gloomy rooms without proper heating in the harsh winter and without adequate ventilation in the hot summer. Often, several exhausted workers of all ages were forced to huddle together in a single cramped, stuffy room. The complete lack of personal space and proper, deep sleep catastrophically exacerbated their accumulated chronic fatigue. For many long years, my grandmother fell asleep only to the sound of dripping ice-cold water and the howling of the piercing wind in the old chimneys. As soon as this ability finally vanished, a merciless, cold, and incredibly swift reckoning awaited them. The next chapter will describe in detail exactly how the quiet and cruel dismissals of those who were no longer needed took place. What always lies hidden behind the beautiful facade of high society is striking in its cold-blooded and calculating cruelty. The process of ruthlessly getting rid of old and weak servants was perfected to an absolute icy degree in wealthy mansions. Famous householders carefully avoided unpleasant scenes and unnecessary emotions, entrusting this dirty work to their stewards. Everything took place incredibly quietly, extremely quickly, and without attracting the slightest attention of the other residents of the house. A woman who had loyally devoted decades to a single family would vanish forever in a single short and terrifying hour. Dismissal was very often and hypocritically framed as a necessary measure due to a planned reshuffling of the entire staff. None of the management spoke directly about the lost strength or irretrievably faded youth of a specific employee. The head housekeeper summoned the aging and frightened woman to her dimly lit office. For a brief and very curt conversation, she was silently handed a small cash settlement and sternly ordered to gather all her personal belongings by evening. The old woman knew countless similar stories, but until the very last moment, she pushed these terrible thoughts from her mind. As she gathered her few meager belongings, the dismissed woman fully realized the depth of her loneliness. In her old, worn-out trunk lay only a few simple work dresses and a pair of heavily worn shoes. All her accumulated capital consisted of a modest and meager salary for the last month she had honestly worked. She had neither a cozy home of her own nor any helpful letters of recommendation to help her find a new job. The heavy doors of the luxurious mansion closed behind her forever, mercilessly leaving her alone with a terrifying uncertainty. The rest of the junior staff were strictly forbidden from discussing the sudden departure of their former colleagues or asking unnecessary questions. Life in the vast house continued uninterrupted, as if the dismissed woman had never existed. Her vacated position was instantly filled by a brand new young maid, brimming with fresh vigor and boundless energy. This swift and cynical replacement served as an eloquent and silent lesson for all the remaining workers. Each of them understood all too clearly their true, very low value in the eyes of their wealthy and influential employers. This silent and ruthless conveyor belt of shattered human destinies operated without a single glitch throughout the entire era. High society preferred to admire beautiful facades, never peering into the dark stairwells of wealthy mansions. The numerous victims of this system vanished without a trace, taking their deep and bitter secrets with them forever. Their tragic stories certainly deserve to be heard and understood in our modern times. Viewers are encouraged to like this video to support the preservation and dissemination of this important historical truth. The following historical fact provides an incredibly deep insight into the cruel structure of the social system of that time. When their meager savings were completely and irrevocably exhausted, the elderly maids had only one legal recourse left. Overcrowded workhouses and state-run shelters for the poorest and most vulnerable segments of the population awaited them grimly. These enormous, gloomy institutions instilled genuine, unadulterated terror in every resident of large Victorian cities. Ending up within these walls was considered the ultimate fall from grace and a final, irreversible loss of human dignity. The gloomy shelter buildings strongly resembled impregnable prison fortresses with high brick walls and tiny windows. Inside these institutions, the strictest discipline and an absolute crushing deprivation of all personal freedom always reigned. All new arrivals were strictly required to wear identical uniforms made of coarse, scratchy, and uncomfortable fabric. My grandmother was always terrified, to the point of trembling, at the thought of ending up behind the high brick walls of the huge city shelter. She had seen how broken and devastated the rare lucky ones, who managed to regain their longed-for freedom, emerged from there. Within those gloomy walls, defenseless people were stripped not only of their own names, but of their entire past. Instead of names, they were ruthlessly assigned dry serial numbers, embroidered in large letters on coarse gray prison robes. It was a well-oiled conveyor belt for erasing unique individuality and brutally suppressing the slightest manifestations of human will. The harsh separation of families and loved ones was one of the most cruel and inhumane rules of such grim institutions. The elderly residents lost forever even the few friends with whom they had managed to form a bond within the walls of the home. Any communication was strictly regulated by the guards and permitted only during specific, incredibly brief hours. Loneliness became utterly absolute and all-consuming, slowly but surely destroying their sanity and psyche. The oppressive silence of the vast common halls was broken only by the echoing footsteps of stern and utterly indifferent guards. Leaving the asylum of one's own volition was a practically impossible and fantastical task for all the elderly residents. Officially, this required finding a reliable guarantor or a permanent, verified job on the outside. High society diligently and hypocritically isolated the residents of the asylums from the gaze of respectable and wealthy citizens. These massive buildings were always located on the most remote outskirts, in industrial areas or near noisy factories. Former devoted servants of mansions quietly and unnoticed faded away amid identical gray walls and hard government-issued beds. Their rich professional experience and years of devotion proved utterly useless in this cold and alien place. The state system mercilessly ground down their fragile lives, turning living people into dry, faceless statistics. For an elderly maid, the loss of a permanent job meant the loss of her soul's social identity, one that had been shaped over the years. Throughout their long adult lives, these women were defined in society exclusively by their professional duties. They were authoritative headmaids, skilled cooks, or deft chambermaids, but rarely simply themselves. Their real names were very often replaced by job titles or simple, short nicknames, convenient for their employers. Stepping outside the wrought iron threshold of a wealthy mansion instantly erased this familiar and utterly clear frame of reference. For many years, their familiar uniform had served as a reliable shield, protecting them from the frightening uncertainty of the outside world. A strict black wool dress and a starched white apron clearly indicated their specific place in society. Without these distinctive clothes, they instantly became invisible, blending completely into the crowd of the city's urban poor. They no longer officially belonged to the elite, closed-off world of wealthy mansions and the most distinguished families. My grandmother kept her old, folded apron with great sadness and reverence as a memento of better and more stable days. The absence of a family of their own made the loss of their professional identity particularly painful, acute, and deeply traumatic. The vast majority of them had absolutely no husbands, children, or close relatives to provide financial or emotional support. All their immense emotional attachment had been directed for years towards serving and sustaining the household of others. When this strong, invisible bond was severed, a frightening, cold, and echoing emotional void formed within them. They had absolutely no one to live for and no one left to care for in this new, empty, and frightening world. Many of them desperately tried to preserve their familiar rituals, even in the most meager conditions of their new homes. They polished the old rickety tables in their tiny, damp, rented rooms until they shone dazzlingly. They carefully and meticulously mended every tiny hole in their worn-out, repeatedly patched, yet incredibly clean clothes. This helped them cling with all their might to the fragile illusion of order and control over their own crumbling lives. Their habit of maintaining perfect and impeccable cleanliness remained with them until their very last and hardest days. Deprived of all support and status, these women quietly and unnoticed faded into the very depths of the city. Their real names have not been preserved at all in dry historical chronicles or the lofty memoirs of noble figures. They remain the invisible and forgotten victims of an era built on ruthless and profound class inequality. Their sad stories compel us to reflect very seriously on the incredible fragility of any human destiny. The true hidden cost of others' comfort was measured solely by their broken and lost lives. The secret that the government tried to carefully hide from the public lies in the horrifying scale of female homelessness. Those dismissed women who could not afford even the cheapest room quickly found themselves right on the cold pavement. The filthy street became the last and cruelest refuge for aging and sick former maids. Here, the usual rules of politeness did not apply at all, and survival depended solely on physical luck and chance. The vast city showed them its true, ugly, and utterly compassionless stone face. Those first long nights under the open sky were a real and unbearable emotional shock for these elderly women. Accustomed to the warmth of their cramped but dry little rooms, they froze bitterly in the biting autumn wind. In a panic, they had to seek shelter under damp bridges, in dark arches, or in abandoned, half-ruined buildings. The illusion of safety vanished completely, leaving them utterly vulnerable to any threats from the city's nighttime underworld. Grandma often saw such wretched souls, desperately wrapping themselves in filthy rags on the cold granite steps. The appearance of these women on the street changed incredibly rapidly until they became completely and frighteningly unrecognizable. Their clothes quickly turned into dirty, torn rags that offered absolutely no protection from the night's cold and dampness. Their faces were blackened by ingrained soot and street dust, and their unkempt hair fell into stiff, tangled mats. Society preferred to arrogantly blame the poor themselves for their wretched, filthy, and pitiful condition. It was believed that only the exceptionally lazy, stupid, and depraved ended up at the very bottom of the street. None of the wealthy had the slightest desire to delve into the real stories of honest workers cast aside because of old age. Sincere compassion was an incredibly rare guest on the wide streets of the cities during the glorious age of splendor. Callousness and utter indifference reigned supreme in this cruel world of triumphant big capital. Every broken street life was a silent and harsh indictment of the entire value system of that time. The immense wealth of some was inevitably and cynically built upon the hopeless poverty and powerlessness of others. These unfortunate women sacrificed their health for the prosperity of those who ultimately turned away from them with disdain. A natural and important question arises: who filled the vacancies in the wealthy households? In the next chapter, viewers will learn about the relentless and merciless turnover of domestic staff in the vast mansions. The position of a suddenly dismissed worker in a vast mansion never remained vacant for more than a single short day. House managers always had extensive lists of young women on hand, eagerly awaiting the opportunity to secure a good position. They ran up and down the stairs with incredible speed and handled even the heaviest physical labor with ease. The owners greatly enjoyed seeing fresh, smiling faces around them, radiating health and enthusiasm. This endless, uninterrupted influx of youth created a pleasant illusion of a perpetual celebration within the house's walls. The wealthy employers never became attached to their new servants, viewing them as mere expendable resources. They knew full well that for everyone who left, dozens of others would take her place, ready to work obediently for a pittance. This completely devalued hard human labor and stripped the relationship of any emotional warmth or compassion. To them, the girls were merely convenient tools, ensuring absolute comfort and cleanliness in the reception rooms. As soon as this living tool began to wear out, it was thrown out onto the street without the slightest regret. The constant turnover of servants reliably ensured the era's unbroken radiance, carefully concealing its dark sides. The enormous mansions always remained immaculate, as if they were cleaned by the wave of a magical, invisible wand. Famous guests marveled at the perfect order, without giving a second thought to whose calloused hands created it. The true terrible price of this beauty always remained a secret behind the tightly closed doors of the service quarters. It was a perfectly streamlined system for ruthlessly transforming human lives into dazzling splendor and luxury. The young women themselves sincerely believed for a very long time in the possibility of a successful outcome to their difficult careers. They naively hoped to save money, start their own small business, or marry incredibly well. In very rare cases, some of the most enterprising managed to climb the career ladder and become housekeepers. This granted them a certain limited power, but did nothing to relieve them of loneliness and the heavy moral burden of their work. These housekeepers had to be even harsher and more ruthless than the arrogant masters themselves. It was absolutely impossible to break this terrible, vicious cycle due to the complete lack of alternatives for women. The economy of that cruel era offered them no other means of honest, legal, and stable income. This bitter story repeated itself over and over, mercilessly grinding entire generations of women in its millstones. Their health and youth were spent polishing strangers' stone floors and catering to strangers' absurd whims. One of the most significant and least obvious causes of these women's tragedy was their enforced, sanctioned loneliness. The harsh working conditions in wealthy households virtually ruled out the possibility of forming a strong family of their own. Young maids were very often directly and strictly forbidden from entering into romantic relationships or getting married. Having a family of one's own was considered a major hindrance, distracting the worker from her direct and primary duties. Pregnancy inevitably and instantly led to immediate dismissal with incredible disgrace and without payment of wages. The employers always demanded unquestioning loyalty and the absolute total dedication of all physical and emotional energy. They vitally needed servants who would live solely for the interests of their enormous stone mansions. The personal lives of the ordinary staff were viewed as a direct threat to the ideal order and peace of their wealthy employers. Young women were cruelly forced to choose between a stable but meager income and the chance to become wives and mothers. Many chose stability, completely unaware of the terrible and inevitable consequences of that decision in the distant future. By the time a woman realized her mistake, her youth was already irretrievably gone. The few suitors sought young, healthy girls capable of doing hard, heavy housework. An old, exhausted maid held absolutely no appeal for building a new, strong family. Thus, the circle of their tragic and hopeless loneliness was finally closed, with absolutely no way out. They had given their best years entirely to a stranger's household, only to end up with nothing. The realization of their terrible, irreparable mistake always came too late, when nothing could be changed. They could only watch the happiness of others quietly and with envy through the frosted windows of strangers' homes. Their own single life passed them by, completely dissolving into an endless series of work duties. It was a quiet, decades-long renunciation of their own feminine happiness and destiny. Their sad fate serves as an incredibly grim reminder of the importance of preserving personal freedom and independence. To be fair, it is important to note that by no means did all stories end in street poverty and the workhouse. There were very rare exceptions when wealthy masters showed mercy to their aging servants. Some ancient aristocratic families took great pride in their paternalistic traditions and cared for their loyal workers. They generously provided them with modest pensions or allowed them to live out their days in small cottages on the estate. But such isolated cases were merely a drop in the ocean of the generally ruthless and cruel treatment of staff. These rarest examples of nobility were very often used to create a positive image of all the wealthy classes. Major newspapers took great pleasure in printing sentimental stories about a devoted maid receiving a pension from a count. This greatly helped society ease its conscience and turn a blind eye to the widespread systemic cruelty. People were far more willing to believe in kind employers, completely ignoring the thousands of homeless women on the streets. They felt absolutely none of the warm feelings toward old women that their deceased parents might have harbored. Consequently, payments of the promised pensions were often delayed, and the conditions of their modest living quarters rapidly deteriorated without repairs. Each new generation of owners invariably posed a mortal threat to the well-being of the elderly maids. The Gilded Age left behind magnificent architecture and incredibly beautiful works of art. Major museums still carefully preserve luxurious dresses, the finest porcelain, and massive silver services. But behind each of these magnificent objects lies the invisible shadow of women's arduous and monotonous labor. The dazzling brilliance of gold and crystal was achieved through worn-out hands and forever shattered lives. This immense and invisible human cost is rarely mentioned in grand historical reference books. Behind the incredibly beautiful facades of the mansions, quiet daily dramas unfolded, which it was completely unacceptable to speak of. Society gladly chose to admire the manners of the aristocrats, completely ignoring the suffering of their silent servants. The success and immense wealth of some were always paid for with the health and ruined lives of thousands of other ordinary people. The hierarchy of that harsh era was structured so that the lower classes would always remain invisible. Their faint voices were always drowned out by the loud clatter of social gatherings and the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. The tragedy of aging domestic servants is not merely a historical fact. It is an incredibly profound and terrifying psychological lesson. It clearly shows how easily and quickly a person becomes a mere function in the eyes of a ruthless system. Personality is completely erased, leaving only a set of useful skills and the necessary physical endurance. When this physical resource is finally exhausted, a person is simply cast aside without the slightest regret. This utterly soulless logic of capital permeated every single sphere of Victorian society. Protecting the weakest and most defenseless must always be the top priority of any civilized society. The fates of the forgotten Victorian maids serve as an incredibly powerful and poignant call for humanity and justice. Only in this way can we at least partially atone for our guilt toward those who were betrayed and forgotten. Every bitter tear shed in the darkness of servants' quarters carries immense and undeniable weight in history. These invisible tears forever strip the gilded veneer from the grand portraits, revealing the harsh and terrifying truth of the age of splendor. True respect for the past always begins with acknowledging its darkest and most unsightly pages. Justice insistently demands that the quiet voices of these invisible victims be heard loud, clear, and distinct. The exploration of this complex theme concludes, leaving an incredibly deep and significant mark on the heart of every thoughtful viewer. The story of aging domestic servants in luxurious mansions ruthlessly exposes the deepest social ills of a bygone era. The fates of these powerless women evoke a strong emotional response and force us to completely rethink familiar historical images. Behind every incredibly beautiful facade lay real human dramas, full of pain, deep disappointment, and injustice. Viewers are invited to suggest topics in the comments that they would like to see covered in future videos. Viewers are also asked to be sure to subscribe to the channel so they don't miss new in-depth historical investigations.